Detroit Police Chief James Craig is here on MiWeek, the fight against crime in the city and the community's role in making Detroit safer. Stay put. MiWeek starts right now.
Detroit Public TV is supported by Business Leaders for Michigan, announcing open registration for the Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac Detroit. Keynote speaker is Tom Kelly, leader of a global design firm helping organizations innovate and grow. Motivational speakers, networking opportunities, and creative inspiration. That's the Business Leaders for Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac. Info at businessleadersformichigan.com/events. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining us. You know, we usually don't have a lot of guests on MiWeek, but tonight is a different story. Detroit Police Chief James Craig is someone we've wanted to sit down with as the city continues to grapple with gun violence and as residents and business owners want to feel safer. So tonight, we're devoting a lot of the show to this important conversation. And Chief James Craig joins us here at the table. Chief, welcome to MiWeek. It's good to see you.
Great seeing you too.
And as always, we have our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Guys, it's always good to see you. Chief Craig, it's great that you were able to come here and sit down at the table with us. And, you know, let me just start by saying we've all seen the headlines that have come out this summer from the city of Detroit involving some gun violence in the community. How would you describe how the summer has been so far?
You know, overall, the summer, our overall crime has been good this year. We're still trending in the direction that we needed to. I mean, when you look at last year, certainly I reported out at the end of the year, 299 homicides, still too many, but it was a 47-year low. And many other major cities across America reported the same decline in homicide. And so this year we've seen a slight uptick. We're talking about 5% in the area of homicides, which equates to 8 more people murdered. And then non-fatal shootings were up 2%, which translates into 15 more people shot. As compared, when you go back to 2013, the year I arrived, when we were really peaking, I arrived here in the summer, we're still sitting on a 10% reduction in homicide compared to 2013. Now again, I in no way suggest that the work's over, that we can wave the white flag of success, but we have made progress, we'll continue to make progress. But one thing that's jumped out this year is I really started to look at the trends, the multiple shooting incidents. That's the one incident that has really, in my judgment, created fear. When you talk about shooting into a large gathering like what we saw in Dexter and Webb, what we saw at the car wash at a local park, those are the events that drive a lot of fear. And when we look at we won't call them multiple shooting incidents, and that equates to 3 or more people shot. We've had 19 year-to-date as compared to last year, 12.
What's your explanation for that? I mean, what's going on?
You know, that's interesting. You know, when I first arrived here, you probably remember the multiple shooting incident at a barbershop
Right.
where there was a gambling game. I think it was, if I remember correctly, 9 people shot. And then last year, again, fewer of those type of shooting incidents, but this year, in a short amount of time, we're talking about Dexter and Webb, 200 to 300 people, a trend that I haven't seen.
Does that indicate increased gang activity to you, or is there anything you can put your finger on?
Some of it's gang, like what we believe at the car wash gang, what we believe over at Dexter and Webb has to do with a narcotic nexus. And so that's alarming, and that certainly does drive fear. That's the one event. When you talk about multiple people shot, I mean, there's an expectation if you have a block party that you can have a fun time and not be worried about violence.
But nationally, actually, the number of mass shootings is up. In fact, I saw a stat last week that said there has been 1 mass shooting for every day of the year so far nationally. And I think that gets to a bigger question about whether we've reached a point where policing or enhanced policing is not enough to get at the problem, that something else is going on, and that you know, the things that are within your grasp to change are maybe not the levers we need to be pulling.
Well, you know, there are a couple of issues, and I talk often about this notion of depolicing. I'm very excited about the work that the men and women do in the city of Detroit, the police officers. I mean, when you look at our clearance rate to homicides, certainly from the time I've gotten here, it's increased substantially. But when we talk about depolicing, we look at Baltimore. There was a recent article in USA Today earlier the month looking at a 6-month report, and there's been a trend across the country in major cities where homicide rates are up. In particular, when we look at Baltimore, they've seen 50 more people murdered, and we're talking a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So what's going on? And I can tell you, because I've seen it in other cities, you know, when you talk about police morale, which you've heard me talk a lot about, police morale's down, crime starts to go up. Depolicing is nothing more than not policing at all, not doing the type of proactive work that needs to happen to eradicate violence. The other issue, when you look at this trend across the nation, and while our trend up in homicides has been very low compared to other places, it's like a tipping point. You know, we've seen dramatic lows. I remember a time in the late 80s, 90s, New York experienced it, Los Angeles. We're talking about murder rates that exceeded 1,000, which is dramatic. And you look at today, the city of Los Angeles, even this year, is still down in murder.
So are you buying into this idea that police are backing off a little because of the incidents around the country and the sort of fear of encountering the public?
I wouldn't call it buying in. I would tell you in Detroit, I'm extremely confident that our police officers are out working as hard as they can given the challenges that they've faced, the staffing levels. Evidence of that is certainly our response time. We had reported out and posted just this past week the second lowest response time of this year. I think we're at 15.4 to priority 1 runs, which is good news. That's not depolicing. And so our officers are out, and I know that that's something that was big with the community. When I arrived here, the credibility of the department was down for a primary reason that police officers didn't show up.
Yeah, right.
And that's a key factor. But depolicing does occur. I've seen it.
So go back to the Tuxedo or Dexter and Webb. I was born about 8 blocks from there. I know that neighborhood really well. It has changed dramatically in the 44 years since I was born. What is it about what's going on over there that makes something like that more likely to happen in your judgment now than a year ago or 2 years ago? Why is that going on?
Well, I would submit that having started my police career here in the late 70s, and I worked in that area, the 10th precinct, there was lots of violence in that area even then. And we're talking 1977, 78, 79.
Sure.
And we talk about the murder rates of the 80s and 90s, which was much higher.
Way higher.
We talked about the murder rate here last year in Detroit, while still high, comparatively speaking, the lowest in 47 years. So, you know, one thing that I gauge, at least this issue of perception or the fear of crime, what are people really feeling? What are they saying? I mean, I can wave statistics and say, you know, we're trending in the right direction. Certainly this year, overall crime is down 13%. We ended the year last, overall crime down. But the real gauge, in my view, is what are people saying? And certainly, as we pointed out earlier in our remarks here today, when you talk about multiple shooting incidents, those drive fear.
And when you're talking about those incidents and then asking for the community for their help in solving those crimes and bringing those shooters downtown, you're not getting a lot of that help. Why do you think that is?
Well, part of it's a cultural issue. I would tell you that when you look at our clearance rate, yes, we have detectives that work extremely hard. We use all types of technology, but the public the public does help. I'll give you an example. The recent issues involving the sexual assault suspects. Relentless work by our detectives. Certainly a community that said we're not going to put up, you know, several walks in neighborhoods, people giving us tips. We do get plenty of tips. Now, I did report out Dexter and Webb was different. And Stephen, I think that's kind of where you were going. One of the things that we saw there that was pretty significant is no one was talking. I mean, you're talking about 200 to 300 people at a block party, good people wanting to enjoy summer. Nobody's talking.
So how do you change that us versus them mentality then?
Well, but again, I'm talking about Dexter and Webb, and we have seen many communities where people are cooperating. What happens, if you live in an area that's besieged by violence, the primary concern of the good people that live in that neighborhood is, am I going to be retaliated against if I talk to the police? So how am I going to be assured safety if I cooperate? So the key is creating that relationship, which we've done very effectively through the deployment of our neighborhood police officers. Our community talks to neighborhood police officers. They talk to our investigators. And so when we come upon a situation like a Dexter and Webb, or what we saw at the car wash where people are just not cooperating, we have to use other tactics or strategies to address the issue. And we do that, and many times very effectively.
So you're down to what, 1,800 officers at this point?
You just talk about police officers. I think we're at 15, but you talk about sworn employees, the chief on down, we're at about 1,800.
Okay, so that hasn't changed pretty much since the time you've got here.
There's been a slight reduction because we saw a pretty...
So fewer.
Yeah, we saw a pretty significant attrition rate during bankruptcy, pre-bankruptcy. We have slowed. That rate has slowed dramatically compared to what it was.
So what's the number that you think you need to do the job you need to do, and what's the prospect for getting more? I mean, I don't think anybody would look at that number and say, well, that's plenty for a city of 700,000 with the crime rate that we have. But how do we get more officers, or do you think we need more?
Well, I would say yes, we do need more. I think everyone would agree that we need more. I mean, compared to when I was here and we had as many as 5,500.
Right.
But clearly we had a city of about 1.5 million.
The city was a lot bigger.
But when you look at the poverty rate, which is very different than it was, say, in the 70s, I mean, there was lots of employment, factories booming, neighborhood stable. And so now, very different city. Higher poverty rate, there does translate. You look at any city in America, there's a nexus to that. So when people ask me for that magic number, what would work, of course I could just off the top say 3,000.
Right.
But one of the things I reported out and continue to report out, we needed early on to do a better job at how we deployed our police officers.
Yeah.
I mean, you remember a time when just in 2 administrations ago in the mayor's office, 33 Detroit police officers assigned to executive protection.
Right.
Nowhere else in America.
Right.
Not Los Angeles, certainly not maybe New York, but you're talking about a police department of 35,000. So very different. So again, it had to do with how we restructure, how we deploy. And so when you talk about the here and now, one of the things that we are doing and have been doing is civilianization. So we're putting civilians in positions that have been traditionally staffed by sworn police officers. Yeah. I mean, what jumped out for me when I started 2 years ago was an entire dispatch center that had police officers. It's the police departments I've worked, where I've been police chief, they've all been civilian. So that's just one issue.
So are you able to train, recruit at the pace you need to now?
We are training, we are recruiting. In fact, we just launched this week, last week, a class of 28. We are planning to launch a class every 45 days. We're hiring civilians. And what I wanted to say is that over the last year, we've redeployed or hired 200 police officers back to the field. That's important. We have set a goal that over the next year, that 400 through hiring new police officers and then hiring civilians, and those civilians will replace, you know, sworn officers.
So what's your budgeted level? You've got 1,800 folks in the department. What's your budgeted level?
We're sitting at about our budgeted level. And so again, part of the strategy is not just solely hiring police officers, but taking police officers in positions now and placing them back in the field. We're talking 400. Now, if we're talking 400 over the next year, that's a combination of hiring and redeploying police officers to the field through civilian hiring. That's a key factor. And, you know, as we continue to move along, I know the mayor is committed to putting more police officers in the field, as but we certainly need to make sure that the sworn officers that we have are being used appropriately.
I want to talk a little bit about earlier this summer the curfew surrounding the fireworks and looking at River Days and how the restrictions were eased back a little bit for the youth in Detroit. Talk to me a little bit about youth offenders or juveniles and what you're seeing trending in Detroit and how the change with curfew and how the community interacted in that area maybe kind of changed the conversation about how we're viewing kids in Detroit right now.
Yeah, this was a great effort. I mean, first when we talk about community engagement, our partners in the community who were involved in this, certainly Nolan's leadership in pulling together you know, the NAACP, myself, other community stakeholders, went a long way at coming up with solutions. This wasn't about just constantly talking about problems, but a solution that really has merit, which the city has done well historically when you look at fireworks. You know, fireworks here, Angel Days, well, not fireworks, but Angel Nights has been done superbly because of community involvement and engagement. And so we thought, why not use the same strategy with fireworks? And while we had a short amount of time, and certainly Nolan knew that we were working in less than a week, but we were able to garner a lot of support. We got community volunteers out, and the curfew was a non-issue. I think we may have detained, if my memory serves me, 1 or 2 young people for curfew, which suggests that we can look at another way, and it was demonstrated this year. We had an uneventful, while I certainly lauded the work we did last year, 2014, this year was much better, and we did it without a curfew.
Do you guys have anything else?
When you look at what that number, going back to the number of police officers, is, were you optimistic that the bankruptcy would increase that number over time? That the money that was freed up from the budget that was going to debt and other things might be redirected toward increasing the size of the police department? I think a lot of citizens certainly thought that was going to be the case. I
was optimistic that, you know, certainly we've been able to, when you talk about equipment, you know, now we're deploying newer vehicles. I was openly critical of what I saw coming in the door,
right.
Dilapidated police vehicles. Certainly one of the concerns I had, and I know the mayor did a superb job at going in an innovative way to find a way to give the police officers back 8%. I want to talk about that for a moment because I think that's key. You know, our police officers, probably some of the lowest paid of any major city in America. We know that. And we talk about a safer Detroit, a safer city. We have got to pay our police officers. And so by
way better than we do, yeah.
Right, I mean, that should be a top priority. When you talk about retention, and we can sit here and do recruit, I mean, we're filling classes, but what about the tenured officers that we have, the officers that are out, been committed to the city of Detroit? How do we retain them? Just on my executive protection detail, I lost one recently to the city of Dearborn. I'm looking at losing another professional officer, been a credit to the department for years, looking to move on to Texas. And that's just a few of the stories. And why? Because of pay, because of stability.
So in your mind, increasing pay is at least as important as increasing the number of officers?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, we can increase numbers of officers, but we can never lose sight of the ones that are here doing the work. And while pay is not a sole factor, It is a factor,
one of them,
and we
yeah.
should push that agenda as much as we can.
So, Chief, you've worked in a lot of different cities. Do you see anything in Detroit in terms of violence and the types of violence that is uncommon, not the same as you've seen elsewhere?
Yes. I would tell you probably what was an eye-opener for me, and I think because Detroit has become desensitized to violence. You know, I talk a lot about my time in Maine and the state's model, the way life should be. There's a great expectation that people are safe. And so coming to Detroit, you know, the whole thing of carjacking. I remember when carjacking began to emerge in LA during the 90s where, you know, gang members were carjacking, taking cars from people by violence. It was shut down very quickly. Here, it was almost, well, it's a crime, it happens. That was kind of the sense I got. And so I'm excited that even that crime is trending down and has over the last year and a half. But that's an anomaly for me. Certainly the way conflict is handled. I mean, to have an argument and quickly resort to violence. You know, what I talked about, some of this past year, you know, the multiple shooting incidents. We've seen 19 year-to-date as compared to 12 last year. That's too much. I mean, to go into a group of 200 to 300 people and fire a weapon, that is not what happens in other places. I mean, certainly I'm not saying when you look at the level of violence that Chicago's seen over weekends that far exceed Detroit, but yet, you know, Chicago is a city of, what, 2 million people, which is very different.
Chief Craig, I can't let you go before asking you to take a look at the national picture. I guess
Check.
Every time
Check,
we
1,
see
2.
these stories of police
1, 2.
interaction with drivers, and specifically white police officers and African Americans across the country. First of all, I want to say, when you see these incidents happening, we just had another indictment of a police officer in Cincinnati just yesterday. What is your reaction?
Troubling. But I also look at it through the lens of this is not reflective of the majority of police officers across the country. I have said publicly, I will continue to say, let's not be so quick to judge every single police officer. We have, I think, 18,000 police departments across America. 18,000. And when we look at Detroit, and I know there's a lot of, not so much here as you see in other places, but people in the community here respect, appreciate the work that Detroit police officers do each and every day. And if one police officer engages in criminal misconduct, excessive police force, that's not reflective of an entire police department. And so I look at these as individual. Now, certainly you can look at a department and there might be systemic behaviors where, you know, there's been bias-based policing, allegations of excessive force, a police department that does not look like the community that it's serving. Certainly those issues all together say something. And so, but I'm always looking at this with a critical eye, not so fast to jump to judgment without knowing all the facts. But certainly when we look at that, the first thing we say, and this is the story that the media plays, white police officer, male African-American suspect or subject stopped. There's shootings involving black police officers. And so when you look at the issue of depolicing, and I've had a number of conversations with both black and white, you know, sometimes white police officers feel like it's an indictment against all of them. Are all of them engaging in improper conduct? Of course not.
In the 45 seconds we have left, I just want to ask you briefly, in talking about this, a lot of times people say, well, you know what, if we had more body cameras, if we had more dash cam cameras, and we can record a lot of these interactions and officers can learn from this. You have a pilot program where you have body cameras out there right now. Can you just give us a brief idea of how things are going with that?
Things are great. We've concluded the pilot. We're moving forward with implementation. I'm excited about it. Certainly, I look at it as another opportunity to be transparent with our community. In fact, the Cincinnati incident that you talked about, the officer was wearing a body camera.
And you saw it.
And so the good news is we get to show the community, and I've said it time and again, transparency is key. Working with all of you is key, and putting out the message to the community and showing the community this is what we're doing.
Chief James Craig from Detroit, thanks so much for taking the time and coming and sitting with us, guys. It's always good to see you. And that is going to do it for My Week. Head on over to MiWeek.org now as Nolan, Stephen, and I keep the conversation going. It's more My Week after the show. Tell us what you think on Facebook and on Twitter. We are there during the week. I'm Christy McDonald. Have a great night. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Detroit Public TV is supported by Business Leaders for Michigan, announcing open registration for the Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac Detroit. Topics include trends that could affect your bottom line and how well Michigan is doing in attracting and growing good-paying jobs. A great lineup of speakers, networking opportunities, and creative inspiration. That's the Business Leaders for Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac. Info at businessleadersformichigan.com/events. Funding is also provided by Delta,